It is a place largely unknown to the world before the outbreak of war, and will remain that way even during the conflict. However, for those who were there and survived its Meatgrinder, its name will forever send shivers down their spines and invoke memories of horrific battlefields and horrific casualties. I am, of course, talking about Rzhev. I'm Indy Neidell, and you are watching a World War II special episode about the 1942 Summer Battles of Rzhev. As you know, we don't do special episodes about individual battles. However, I cannot always cover every theater of action as much as I'd like to, especially during the hectic year of 1942. The fighting for Rzhev has been regularly covered on our day-by-day Instagram coverage of the war, which you can also see at our website, and since mid-October under the Community tab, right here on this channel. If you have been missing all that coverage, then you have missed nearly half of our content, where we especially focus on things like the Dieppe Raid, the fight for Madagascar, Kokoda, and Rzhev. I'm going to recap the last 6 months of the fighting for Rzhev because I think it's important for understanding all the Soviet offensives going on at the moment. To understand the strategic importance of Rzhev, you gotta look at the Soviet winter offensive last year, when the Red Army was rapidly advancing against both flanks of Army Group Center. The aim was to cut the Smolensk-Vyazma railway and encircle most of the German Army Group. However, by the spring, the offensive had petered out short of its objective, resulting in a massive salient that left two sizable Soviet formations in the German rear. One claw stretched out from the northwest and comprised the 39th Army and the 11th Cavalry Corps. The other penetration, smashed in by the Belov Group, named after its commander Pavel Belov, originally came from the southeast, but was itself surrounded by the Germans in February. Moreover, Moscow directed Belov to stay put, seeing his group as a valuable pawn for a future offensive. He began receiving supplies by air to keep his strength up, and was even joined by the paratroops of the 4th Airborne Corps, as well as local partisan formations. I talked about that a bunch in the regular episodes, though. Meanwhile, the Germans had to decide what to do about their own salient that massively extended their front. Its creation was partly thanks to Hitler's stand-fast order, and he was not about to voluntarily cede any ground now that the immediate threat had passed. Although the extended front drained a lot of manpower, it also opened the opportunity for encircling maneuvers to the north and the south while keeping the Soviets anxious about a drive for Moscow. Giving it up to reduce the front line would not only relieve the Soviets, it would also reveal that the 1942 summer campaign would not be directed at Moscow, as Stalin and his staff firmly believed. Still, with the Soviets only a couple of miles from the Vyazma railway, the Germans could not just rest easy. The enemy penetrations had to be wiped out to eliminate the threat to the Army Group's lifeline. On May 24th, Walter Model's German 9th Army, the one most threatened by the Soviets in their rear, goes on the offensive against Belov's group in Operation Hanover. No fewer than 7 German divisions attacked the 20,000 Soviets holed up between Vyazma, Smolensk, and Spaz-Demensk. But despite superior numbers, the Germans failed to efficiently sweep the woods while Belov's men avoid contact. The second operation, Hanover 2, follows the first one to complete the job, but again, the Belov group escapes. Over 10,000 men eventually managed to break out towards the southeast and reach friendly lines held by the 10th Army at the end of June. 7,000 stay behind to continue partisan operations. But although the bulk of Belov's group has escaped the German trap, the pocket of resistance threatening a railway from the south has successfully been eliminated. With the southern threat gone, 9th Army shifts its attention to the penetration to the northwest. On July 2nd, Operation Deadliest kicks off with an attack against the neck of the Soviet salient, where the Soviet 22nd and 41st Armies are covering the rear of the 39th Army and the 11th Cavalry Corps. Coming from the north are the panzers of the 23rd Corps, while 3 divisions from the Esebek group attack northward from Belyi to meet them. The Soviets put up a tenacious defense to keep the corridor open, but by the 5th, the Germans have shut the door behind the Soviets, trapping parts of the 22nd and 41st Armies, the entire 39th Army, and the 11th Cavalry Corps. although sizable formations do filter out of the encirclement to the northwest during the following days, the Germans really have sealed the ring by the 9th. A breakout effort on July 21st allows some 10,000 men or so to escape the pocket, but apart from that, only small groups will manage to avoid captivity over the following weeks. The Soviets suffer around 60,000 casualties, 40 to 50,000 of whom are marched off into German captivity. Those who evade capture continue the fight as partisans. With its rear area secured, Army Group Center can begin looking for ways to improve its defensive position with limited offensives, because that's all Army Group Commander Gunther von Kluge is allowed to do while Fall Blau unfolds on the southern part of the Eastern Front. That does not prevent him from planning some ambitious operations, however. In one, codenamed Operation Dörflinger, the 9th Army is to push out north to Ostakov and link up with the 16th Army at Demyansk to shorten the front and encircle the bulk of the Soviet Kalinin front in the process. Another plan, Operation Whirlwind, calls for the 4th Army and the 2nd Panzer Army to launch a pincer attack against the Sukhinichi Bulge to destroy the Soviet 10th and 16th armies and gain a shorter and more defensible front. The Soviets, however, are also not sitting idly. They have massed the bulk of their armed forces on the approaches to Moscow, thinking that the German summer offensive will focus on capturing the capital. When the blow falls in the south instead, Stavka decides to use the gathered forces to improve its defensive positions, much like the Germans are also planning to do. Within the Soviet plans, Ivan Konyev's Kalinin front is to reach the Volga and seize the German stronghold of Rzhev from the north using the 30th and 29th armies. The 31st and 20th armies on the northern wing of Georgy Zhukov's western front are to join in this effort with an attack on the German Volga bridgehead of Zubtsov and the railway line running through Sychovka. The 5th Army will make a frontal assault on the town of Gzhatsk, while the 33rd Army will advance towards the northwest to link up with the 20th Army west of Gzhatsk and encircle the German defenses. The Soviets will be the first ones to strike. On July 30th, the offensive kicks off as the Kalinin front opens the attack. With a 3-to-1 superiority in infantry, a 2-to-1 advantage in armor, and a 2-to-1 superior in artillery, the 30th Army moves in from the north. The operation is off to a promising start. The preliminary barrage smashes a hole in the first German defenses through which tanks and infantry can make good headway. However, that same day, heavy rains come and turn the roads into rivers of mud, severely impeding any armored attacks. The offensive bogs down around the town of Polonino, just 5 kilometers north of Rzhev. It is up to Zhukov's western front to breathe life into the offensive with a thrust from the west on August 4th. Now, its numerical superiority is even greater, a 7-to-1 advantage in infantry, artillery, and armor along much of the front. German resistance disintegrates before the 31st and 20th Armies, heading for Zubtsov and Sychovka respectively. German divisions from the 3rd Panzer Army, earmarked for Whirlwind, are immediately sent north to try to halt the advance, resulting in a major tank battle on the southern wing of the 20th Army that, according to the 20th Army's Chief of Staff, involves 800 Soviet tanks against 700 German ones. The 5th and 33rd Armies join in on the offensive around the same time, but they only see meager gains. By August 23rd, though, the 20th Army has reached the town of Karmenovo and the Vazuza River, while the 31st and 29th Armies capture the German Volga River bridgehead at Zubtsov. However, it is here that the Soviet offensive runs out of steam. Zhukov departs for Stalingrad and his new posting as deputy commander-in-chief, passing command over the western front to Ivan Konyev. Maxim Perkayev becomes the new commander of the Kalinin front, but the 30th and 29th Armies are transferred to the western front, leaving Konyev in charge of the operations around Rzhev. He decides to halt the attacks by the 33rd, 5th, and 20th Armies on the southern axis of the offensive, and instead focus his efforts on the capture of Rzhev itself. The 30th Army is to continue its direct attacks on the town from the north, while the 29th and 31st Armies approach from the southeast. Again, however, despite Konyev's concentrated efforts on capturing Rzhev, the situation remains unchanged. In August, the Soviet progress can be measured in inches, and September is no different. They are up against an elaborate system of strongpoints centered around the villages before Rzhev and interconnected by a web of trenches. Waves of Soviet infantry crash into the German lines. But apart from an attack in the northeast that reaches the final belt of fortifications on the town outskirts, all are mowed down with little ground to show for it. Rifleman Boris Gorbachevsky describes one such attack. A growing destructive fire sweeps up and down the attacking lines with a storm of machine gun fire. The hoarse coughing of mortars follows the machine guns. Artillery starts to roar. Enormous geysers of earth toss the living and the dead high into the air. Thousands of shell splinters, like poisonous hornets, rip into men, tearing bodies and the earth. "Forward, forward," shout the officers who are still alive, many just before dropping dead among their own soldiers. The men are mechanically moving forward, and many are dying, but we now no longer belong to ourselves. We have all been seized by the incomprehensibly savage element of battle. Shell bursts, shell fragments, and bullets are sweeping away the infantry lines, shredding the living and the dead. In the howl and shriek of shells, we stop recognizing one another. Faces have become pale, lips compressed. Many men are trembling from fear. Some men are vomiting. Some are crying as they advance. And the tears, mixed with sweat and filth, stream down their faces and blind their eyes. Some men have involuntarily urinated or defecated from the shock. Wild swearing and cursing fills the air. One man is trying to cross himself on the run, gazing upwards with a prayer. Someone is calling for his beloved Marushka. On September 30th, the Soviets finally call a halt to the offensive. In just 2 months, they have taken well over 300,000 casualties in battle against just under 70,000 German casualties. But what have they actually achieved? The Kyhle and Western fronts have recaptured a couple dozen kilometers of ground along the front, sure, but they have reached none of their original objectives. The Soviets have succeeded in thwarting Army Group Center's own plans for 1942, though, and perhaps more importantly, forced the German High Command to divert sizable reinforcements to the area that could have been used at Stalingrad. But was it worth the immense human price? The Red Army seems to think so, for it will feed the Meatgrinder once again soon enough in Operation Mars, which you will follow in the regular weekly episodes. If you have not seen the other such Instagram summary I did covering the Kokoda track campaign, you can click right here for that. But follow our day-by-day coverage to complement all of our other coverage here on the channel. And for ever more content, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com, because that is what pays for all of this and all of that and all of everything. See you next time.